This summer, fall in love with DC all over again. District Bridge's summer bucket list is back. Think frozen cocktails at local bars, splashy pool days, museum adventures, fun challenges that support small business and spark everyday joy. Top players could win up to $250 in gift cards and prizes from the places that make DC feel like home. The party is running through August 15th. Sign up for free at districtbridges.org/DC Summer Bucket List. Today on CityCast DC. In DC, everything is political, even the buildings. One of Trump's first moves back in office was saying federal buildings should follow traditional design styles. Meanwhile, there's growing buzz about turning the city's aging office buildings into housing. Public historian and former architect Neil Flanagan joins us to break down what these shifts mean for the architecture that shapes DC and the politics behind it. Today's Wednesday, July 2nd. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. So Neil, you're a public historian, architect, and a DC native. How would you describe DC's architectural style?
DC is very conservative, not like conservative with the big C, but conservative with the little c. And they're always a little behind New York, LA, or London. But more than anything, DC's architecture is regulated. And I think that's actually what we really want to talk about in this interview to some degree, is the way that these social trends and these regulations have shaped DC that we understand and know.
Is that unusual or distinct about DC? Like when you look at other cities like New York or LA, that the architecture is so specifically regulated and thus that shapes the way we think of DC architecture?
Absolutely. Francine Hubin, who is the architect who designed the renovation of the MLK library, she said that the process of getting that approved was the most arduous review process she's ever done. And she's, working all over Europe in centuries-old buildings.
How is DC's architectural style kind of changed in your lifetime, given all of that regulation and rigidity, I guess? Or maybe is rigidity not the right word there?
No, I think rigidity is a good word. I think there's this kind of a hesitancy because you need to make sure a lot of people are on board with what you're doing. Architects come down from New York or from other cities and sort of be a little surprised at how much kind of consensus building they have to do. And there, of course, are the politics. I mean, sometimes politicians simply get involved. And other weird things, like a huge factor when the Eisenhower Memorial was being built, there was a controversy that was just sort of the Senate committee that oversaw the Department of the Interior just wanted to pick a fight. Things like that just intervene. But what I'd say in terms of DC changing, the main thing is just how much everything's been built up. So I was born in the 80s, and all these neighborhoods, you put aside neighborhoods that have gentrified, they're neighborhoods that are just totally reconstructed, and most of that has been neighborhoods that were disinvested in the past and then were parking lots for most of my youth. So
let's get into some of the specifics of it, because something that I love about DC is that when you walk around the city, one neighborhood will look one way and it's a very distinct style. Like my neighborhood is full of old school row houses. Another neighborhood would look totally different. And I'm wondering how DC came to have this kind of hodgepodge look to it.
Well, I think that's actually DC is an unusually homogenous city. What is nice is that those neighborhoods have been preserved. And I would say that the two things you're seeing are the process of society, taste, and industry intersecting again with regulations. And the one regulation that you're probably thinking of is maybe the 3 or 4 regulations put out in the 1870s. And they specified that basically that all buildings in DC had to be made out of fireproof materials. The cheapest fireproof material at that time really was brick. And they also said that you could take part of these wide streets that were set down in 1790s. You could say, well, that's going to be what's called the public parking, and it becomes a yard. So even though it's not your property, you can kind of use it and improve it. And then the last thing is they said that we can also build certain structures into the public parking. And to this day, that's like the definitive feature of a row house are these big stoops and these big bay windows. So that's really in a way you'll get some of those features. And then it's whether they did urban renewal to the neighborhood or whether it was zoned commercial, that's going to set up those patterns. So you see it's the intersection of all these things coming together.
So you're writing a book about the history of planning in DC, and you've got a great list of different buildings that you say define DC's kind of architectural history. Where is the best place to start in terms of understanding DC's architectural history?
Let's start with that L'Enfant plan, right? And actually the best way to go experience the L'Enfant plan is to go to Freedom Plaza, right? So when you go down to Freedom Plaza, I think a lot of people know there it's a little desolate. It's down on Pennsylvania Avenue. There's a lot of traffic, and then it's skateboarders love it. So that was built in the 1980s by a group called Venturi Scott Brown. And if you walk around, look at it, there's on the ground is a map, and that map is Peter L'Enfant's design for DC. But if you look really closely, it's not actually the map of the DC that we know, because it's from an earlier draft. And he was very famously fired for being supposedly somewhat difficult. And the map was completed by a guy named Andrew Ellicott that significantly simplified that. And one of the things that the Venturi Scott Brown was very obsessed about, and the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation, they're the kind of government agency that did it, they really wanted to make a point about restoring L'Enfant's legacy and the fact that Ellicott moved Freedom Plaza one block to the west, and in their minds kind of ruined it. So the politics are there from the beginning, and then also the history of politics is really central to our interpretation of the city.
So let's sort of stay in that general area, because I feel like today when you go downtown, things look very different. There's all of these kind of glass box office buildings. What's up with that stylistic choice?
Yeah, right. If you go there, you can stand in front of Plaza. You can look at this glass box building that's right on, I guess it's 13th Street. And what actually is happening is, again, this kind of surprising regulation that, it's not even zoning, it's not any federal law. It's actually a private regulation that's referenced within the building code called the ASHRAE 90.1 standard. And for years, in the 50s and 60s, when energy was very cheap, they could just build buildings out of glass, and it just kept them warm and cool in the summer all the time. You got an old building, the air conditioning is like walking into a freezer. This really fell apart in the 70s, and this hostility to glass buildings went away, and we had postmodernism where they were trying to bring back more historical references and go back to these kind of old-fashioned windows. But what happens is that in 1999, this organization, they changed the code, and they allow people to do something called the energy cost budget, where you can balance the energy efficiency of one element within the building and another. So what they do is you have this change to the code, but then you also have improvements in glass chemistry, and you have improvements to the way that the glass is jointed, and you have improvements in the application of these. They'll spray these very thin metal films that reflect only infrared light instead of visible light. So you look at the older glass buildings; they're oftentimes like mirrored. They're mirrors, and the newer ones are very transparent, and that's actually all transparent in the light that we can see, but not transparent in the light that actually brings heat into buildings.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Starbucks. Smooth, bright, deliciously crafted. Introducing Starbucks Sansera Blend, their smoothest, brightest coffee yet. It's a new kind of light roast, one that's packed with so much flavor, it shines no matter how you brew it. So go ahead and try it hot, iced, black, or with a splash of creamer. Visit athome.starbucks.com/Sansera-blend-coffee to bring Starbucks Sansera Blend home.
So kind of staying in the sort of downtown area, obviously the Smithsonian museums are some of DC's biggest landmarks. Like, people come visit them on field trips and stuff, even, when they're young. How have they shaped the way that DC looks as a whole?
There's one building in particular that I think really is worth paying attention to, and that's the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. And that has a really interesting story, because that's the first building that's built in sort of the modern mall. So before that time, the mall was literally just like Central Park. And there's a movement that comes into the United States that's called the City Beautiful movement. And they have this vision for these grand cities. And the first city they really tend to take a look at is DC. And they produce something called the Macmillan Plan. This Macmillan Plan is really inspired actually by the 1893 World's Fair, right? Probably a lot of people have read Devil in the White City. Gives an okay history about the architecture side. The murder side it's not true. But this really broke everyone's brains. I mean, they went to this place, and it was this incredible, monumental, very Roman-influenced space, and they walked away like wanting to change cities everywhere. And the first one they took a crack at really is DC, and they produced this Macmillan Plan. But that wasn't the only trend going on. There was a lot going on in the world. But the people who had worked on the Macmillan Plan got a lot of influence within politics. And so what we see when you look at this building is this very Roman. It has a dome and these arches and these statues on top of columns, an architrave as they call it. It's heavily influenced by a bunch of different Roman buildings. But that's not the original design. The original design is actually this building that was inspired by a different World's Fair, which is the 1903 World's Fair, which had just happened when they were designing this building. And we see this in drafts produced by the architect whose name is Arthur Brown Jr. His most famous building is Pawnee City Hall, which is actually Pasadena's City Hall. The original design looked like this. It has this kind of egg-shaped dome with lots more curvilinear stuff, this grand curved arch. The ornament is a little bit more free. It's not just Roman. And what happened is the people who worked on the Macmillan Plan, with the help of Senator Francis Newlands and also Teddy Roosevelt, they looked at this and said, no, this is not what we want. We are not French. We are trying to emulate what the founding fathers did. Whether that's true or not, different question. But that's what they thought they were doing. So that person who came in and worked on this Macmillan Plan, his name was Charles McKim, and he came in and delivered this very conservative design that's very Roman, and that set the tone for all of the mall. That political battle set the parameters. And subsequent to that, they created something called the Commission of Fine Arts, which regulates federal buildings, and starting, I think, in 1910. And they still do it to this day.
Well, I know that there has been a ton of talk about sort of downtown office buildings turning into apartments and these sort of weirdly political conversations about DC's architecture, should there be a specific style that this is the only style of building that we will allow in DC's government buildings? Do you think that that's an example of what we're going to see more of, that these conversations about the way that DC looks architecturally will also reflect a lot of political wheeling and dealing and political, maybe ideological headbutting, I guess, for lack of a better word?
Probably. It's very difficult to understand. I mean, the person behind a lot of this Trump orders is a man named Justin Shubo, who's not an architect, but did sit on the Commission of Fine Arts during Trump's first term. And I think that there is certainly an agenda among the actual big C conservatives on the right about to sort of particularly punish brutalist architecture. I think we'll see a lot of that, particularly as buildings are sold off in Southwest. And there's a board called the Public Buildings Reform Board, I think is what it's called, that is currently in the process of trying to decide what real estate in Southwest the federal government wants to get rid of. And so I think we'll see a lot of it there.
And if folks are interested in learning more about brutalism in DC, we actually have a whole episode all about it, so definitely check it out. Neil, what do you see as the next big architectural milestone for DC?
The next big one, I think, is really going to be converting buildings from one use to another. And we can actually see that, this starts really with historic preservation, right? It starts with projects like the old post office, which was, the Macmillan Plan people, they hated the post office. The brutalists, they hated the post office. Everyone wanted to tear this down until a group called Don't Tear It Down tried to save it. I love that name. It's just really, there's so many names in DC where you don't know what people do, but you know exactly what they want. And they successfully fought this and had it converted from kind of a decrepit postal office, and that supposedly was just mounds of guano in this tower, and they had to clean all that out by hand, all these crazy stories about it. And then now it's, of course, it was the Trump Hotel, and then now it's the Waldorf Astoria. But what we're seeing now is also we're looking at buildings that maybe aren't well loved. They aren't these kind of monumental grand buildings like the old post office. They could be like buildings down on Buzzard Point. There's 2 buildings, one of which is, I think, called River Point. And what it is it was this big office building that was built by a man named Laszlo Tauber. If you want to know more about Laszlo Tauber, I wrote an article for the Washington City paper about all of his shenanigans down there. He was a surgeon, a strange man who ran all these federal office buildings, and they were terrible buildings. They were just absolute, pancakes, windowless. Think Severance, but not like Severance, but the lighting isn't even good, And then people kind of said, they can't as particular, things like WeWork came in, and you started having more open office, and the quality of the office experience started to improve. And then these buildings became less popular. And then, of course, we have work from home. Telework starts with the federal government, and then COVID supercharges it. So there's all these office buildings that are not leasable anymore. And they used to be a license to print money, is to rent to the federal government. And what you're going to start seeing is these converting these into residential. And River Point's a really interesting one because it has this colossal Severance Lumon, kind of floor plan. And they had to cut huge parts of the building out to turn it into apartments that could be leasable. So if you look out on Google Maps, you can see it just has all these slices taken out of like a sheet cake. And then they've basically stripped it down to nothing but the concrete structure and then converted it. And that was done by Douglas Development and a couple different architects. And you're going to see more of that. It's expensive. These things have not come in cheaply. That place at least has beautiful riverside views. It's not L Street where there's another conversion. So you're looking at DC government, and developers are looking at tax breaks to try to incentivize these, to bring them at least within profitability, at least if not affordability, then at least profitability for the developers. And there's a lot of technical challenges because some of these buildings are just going to be hard to convert, and we'll see how well it can be done. But the another reason they're interested in these conversions is it's no longer the architecture is historic. It's maybe that you want to save carbon, right? So concrete is one of the biggest producers of carbon. Not only does it take the energy, carbon to make the energy, but the production of concrete itself actually produces carbon from chemistry. And so the idea that we can preserve all these concrete buildings we have and maybe replace the facades, there's a huge sustainability boon there, especially if you can get rid of a lot of the plastic that's in the built environment. And there's a firm in DC called Build Us, BLD.us, that does some really interesting stuff with this. And I think there's someone to keep an eye on, particularly in terms of this next step of not just preserving carbon and efficient energy, but actually bringing natural materials back into the environment with modern production methods and things like that.
I think DC's future architecturally will be interesting to keep an eye on, and I'm really glad that you're doing all that work as a historian yourself.
Thank you.
Neil, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Bridget. This was great.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. Our production team this week was Priyanka Tilve, Annie Reese, Julia Karen, Ash Durbin, Natalia Aldana, and Noah Snyderman. Newsletter editors Kayla Cody Stemmerman and Natalia Aldana wrote our fabulous newsletter, Hey DC, this week. And our hosts are Michael Schaefer and me, Bridget Todd. Music is by Alex Roldan, with additional music from Blue Lou from Triple Scoop Music via Getty Images. If you enjoyed the show, text it to your friend who loves architecture. We'll be back tomorrow with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.